Welcome back. All right, so I wanted to talk about this today. It's been a while since I talked about this on the channel, specifically as a video. Analytics. It feels like now they're more integrated with the National Hockey League than they used to be. It's never going to be exactly where it is like in baseball. Baseball analytics have really changed things. In hockey, where they show up is the early goalie pull, where we go, why are they pulling the goalie 6 minutes with 6 minutes left in the game? It's because statistically, you have a better chance of catching up. It's just the stats tell you have a better chance of catching up, even though we've seen teams that are down by 3 end up down by like 4 or 5 and whatnot. But it statistically is the best option. Now, you have your standard stats, and that's always going to be the gold standard. And that's always going to be how players get paid. And certainly every July the 1st, we see contracts get handed out. And at times, contracts get handed out of a pretty high money value to players that those in the analytic community would say, this is a terrible contract. And they'll say it immediately. Now, I don't, because I have no idea how a player's going to play in a new environment with new teammates. Maybe they had bad numbers the season prior. Maybe they weren't in an environment where they could succeed. And so I think the analytics tell you something of what's going on. It doesn't give you the whole picture. And goals and assists are still and always going to be how players get paid and how we measure a player's performance, ultimately. There are times where the analytics tell you this guy's playing well, but he's not producing. But if he's not producing, he's not producing, right? And there are other times where a player's producing and the analytics will say, hey, he's overproducing. So, he's not, it's going to come back down to the mean. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes a player just has a really good season, has good luck all year. And so you have ice time, shots, wins, saves, shutouts, all the standard stats. And when I do videos on the careers of hockey players, I always leave it to the regular standard stats. I don't include all the advanced numbers, even on current players. I think the NHL is as close as they're going to get to really fully embracing the advanced statistics, in that they have the NHL Edge now, that website they've got set up. The one thing that's been noted is you can find out who the best is at everything. It might be a little more difficult to figure out who the worst is at certain things. And the question becomes, is it the general managers that don't want you picking on a player for having the worst statistics on the NHL Edge site? Would the NHLPA not want that to be the case? And I've definitely seen posts about who the worst players are in the league from an analytic perspective. It always leads to an interesting discussion. And so when this channel started out back in 2016, I was very much of the mind of analytics. I don't know. I don't really trust the analytics. Not really. I don't care. Now, of course, I use them with goaltenders. I find they're handier with goaltenders than they're necessarily with everybody else. Because, like, for instance, on Money Puck, shooting above average, or something measuring that shooting ability above the average, the best one in the NHL is Leon Draisaitl. And Mikko Rantanen's right near the top, too. So sometimes the analytics sites will just double down on what we already know of who the best players are in the National Hockey League. And I'd be interested to know if some of the analytics get used by players who don't get as much attention when they're doing contract negotiations. Because while the NHL has some advanced stats baked into their website now, they don't go into the amount of depth that a lot of the analytics sites do, which surprises me, because you've got sensors in the puck, you've got sensors that are sewn into the jerseys the players wear on the ice. It'd be very easy for the National Hockey League to do so much in terms of in-depth analytics that they could swamp everybody, and they could basically make it that nobody could compete with the National Hockey League in terms of that. Now, analytic stats, expected goals for or against. This is where people get kind of like, oh, well, expected goals don't count. The real goals count. True. But the advanced stats are also supposed to tell you, okay, this team's losing, but they're playing well, or this team's winning, but they're not playing well. And once you get into the analytics of it, this team is playing better than their record, or this team's playing worse than their record. And expected goals are supposed to tell you that. And again, when you look at a team that's doing really well in the first half and getting some luck, maybe the expected goals are going to show you that. And then in the second half of the year, it may fall off. I don't see as much talk about Corsi, PDO, or Fenwick. These are three advanced statistics that were talked about much more about a decade ago than they are now, because there's so much in-depth discussion now when it comes to the analytics. The one thing is, and I will agree with people on this, that different websites have different stats because they may have different measurements of what qualifies as a high danger chance. They may have different measurements for various statistics that they track. So one player might be really high on one site. They might be high on the other one as well, but not quite as. So this is where I think if the National Hockey League stepped in and said, all right, here's our standard. Here's how we're going to measure high danger, medium danger, low danger. Here's how we're going to do it. I think they could do a very good job of putting something together that all the other sites couldn't match up to and couldn't keep up with. Not that I want to see them put out. I'm just kind of surprised the NHL hasn't figured out a way to do that at this stage. So WAR is one that I don't get into either, which is wins above replacement. I don't feel like that one is as useful in hockey terms as opposed to, say, baseball. Baseball WAR is I think more accurate than necessarily it is for hockey. And then goals saved above expected is the one that I use a lot with goaltenders. And I feel like that one works. And it's better than goals saved above average, which is a different stat. I'm not going to necessarily get into that now. Goals saved above average is used on Hockey Reference, for instance. I go through Money Puck, Evolving Hockey. I've used their stats as well. Hockey Reference. Hockey DB is fine for just your regular standard stats. And the interesting thing is that all the analytic data, as soon as a player is retired, the standard stats are what stand the test of time. That's what we've seen anyways. That, advanced stats don't get brought up in their little career spiel that you see a team put out when a guy retires. And you'll see the analytics sites put out like a little bit of something on a player who's retired and, get into, well, here's how he was and here's what his stats look like. They'll have the little charts. But it doesn't feel like that's the one thing with the analytics. It's an in the now kind of stat because once the time has gone and we're into the following season, even the stats from last year, yeah, those are fun, but what about this year, right? And I do wonder this. So we get into the analytics and the weeds on it. Well, now sports betting becomes, legal and sports betting is everywhere. So has this community on some level made it so that, you get into weeds all this and you go, I think I understand the game better. So it gives people this idea that they understand the game better than the standard fan. So when there's some sports betting out there, and you can bet on everything, and I think analytics help with that too, right? Where you can go, well, this guy's got X amount of shot attempts per game, so I'm going to bet that he's going to get this many shots because the analytics tells us. I feel like these two things don't necessarily promote one another, but they might be adjacent. And I don't have stats on that. I'm not making a statement of fact here, but it does feel like that the sports betting we see and some of the prop bets that you see out there are definitely tied a little bit to the analytics community. And yeah, it is one of those interesting things because ideally for the advanced stats community, you kind of want them to be predictive, especially once you're going into the playoffs where you want to go, okay, this is predictive, but it's not always predictive because there's always that level of randomness with the NHL. People always say, oh, it's luck. I can't. I've seen too many dynasties. I've seen too many teams that are just consistently really good for me to say, it's luck. And I think sometimes when people just shrug it off and go, well, that's just luck that team's doing well, or it's just luck that guy's got goals. I think it belittles the amount of effort that's being made by those players to make those plays and to get those goals. So I don't want to belittle anybody with any of that. But I just wonder, is the NHL ever going to fully commit to those advanced stats? To all of it? Because if they did, like we saw already, Cap Friendly get bought by the Washington Capitals because they track the salary cap so well. And now, of course, we have other sites. Puckpedia has a very good, data set for the salary cap and everything. How long is it until someday a team goes, hey, we'll buy Puckpedia? And I'm sure if you're the creator of Puckpedia, you may be like, well, I don't really know if I want to sell. And then they go, how many millions would you like? And you go, and have it. So, and if anybody's going to ask, there is not a price on me for this channel. There wouldn't be. I've always been very grateful that on any given day, I can do a video on whatever I want. And I don't have to meet any kind of deadline, and I don't have to talk about any certain topics or avoid certain topics as well. So I do feel like we're seeing more integration now of the analytic data with the standard data than we've seen in previous times. As I mentioned before, every single team now has their own analytics. Every single team has their own analytics department, and they all measure it differently. Everybody has different measurements, and so I just wonder if you coalesced all this under the NHL umbrella, where the NHL had a stats team, an advanced stats team that was doing all of this. Even bring in some of the people who are more prominent in the advanced stats community as a regular thing on their website. Like, I know they bring them in, I know they talk about the analytics, but really commit to it, really double down on it. I feel like there is definitely something to be learned, and I think of it more like, your standard stats, your goals, assists, ice time, shots. Those are the key things. But the analytics give you more of an idea of what's going on. And this defenseman's struggling. And then you look at the stats and you find out actually the problem is the guy he's paired with is dragging him down. Because when he's not paired with that guy, he's playing much better, right? Or maybe they both play better when they're away from each other and you realize this is a bad pairing. So I would love to see the NHL do something along those lines, but I'd be interested to know your thoughts in the comment section below. Are we starting to see more and more of everything being integrated, and is sports betting part of it? Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching. I will talk to you again soon.